Hello, friends, and welcome to Home is Where the Body Is. I'm Jen, an ADHD woman with EDS, POTS, complex PTSD, and OCD, shaped by an abusive religious upbringing. I spent much of my life feeling like I was balancing precariously over an endless pit, constantly reaching for a stable home that always seemed just out of reach. Today, I can honestly say that home is wherever I am right now, built on the stable ground that's growing out of a deepening relationship with my body and myself. In this podcast, I share the lived experiences that brought me here, in case it helps someone feel less alone or supports them on their own journey home. Today I'll be talking about what my attempts at becoming a content creator have taught me. I've learned that expression itself has inherent value, regardless of reception or audience size. I suppose, by the very act of me recording this, that I am a content creator. I'm not a successful content creator by any means. This is not my first attempt at making a podcast, and the first attempt failed. And this attempt also will maybe fail. I don't know yet. Although I guess it depends on what your definition of failure and success is. But lately, it's been my dream to be a real capital C content, capital C creator, right? The type whose content is eagerly awaited by their fans because their words add real value to the lives of their followers. I'm not really sure if my words add values to the lives of the majority of people who come across them, or if they ever will. I also realize that as someone who likes to talk about trauma, autism, the patriarchy, and other such much discoursed topics, I'm neither the first nor the best in this niche, by far. But in actuality, it doesn't really matter. Art is as much for the benefit of the person who creates it as it is for the person who consumes it. At least that's what I've come to believe. Self-expression is meaningful and valuable, regardless of who witnesses it. And I think that we each have our own unique voice and our own unique ways of hearing the words of others. Sometimes a single voice can reach thousands of needy ears, imparting desperately needed wisdom, validation, and comfort across a great distance. Sometimes, however, one specific voice reaches one specific person at exactly the right time and in exactly the right way, changing the course of a life for the better. I never know, and you never know, when our words, phrased just so and with authenticity, will fill a hole in someone's life. And I think we all have examples that we can think of times when the words of others have touched us in just the right way, right? Through a podcast or a YouTube video or a book or whatever it may be, have touched us in just the right way. I don't know, to push us toward an epiphany that had been building for a while, or just slightly alter the course of our healing journey for the better. Because of this realization, I gave myself permission to express myself more, to do, quote, bad art and release it out into the world. And I found what's interesting is that, quote, bad art can sometimes be even more therapeutic than polished art. When we drop the goal of impressing others, we're more likely to be honest. And honesty is what heals, not aesthetic perfection. And in a way, continuing to create despite doubt, I think, reinforces a quiet but radical belief that I don't have to be the best to be worthy of expression. Like, my first podcast, I personally think was probably much worse than this one. But I do think that it I don't know, it fulfilled a need in me to just get something out there. And so I absolutely do not regret doing it. And I think, of course, even if this podcast fails and I try again later and I'm like, oh, my second try was so bad too, I won't regret it. Because I think it's just helpful to get something out there. Nobody starts doing amazing art the first time they pick up a pencil or a paintbrush or a musical instrument or a microphone or whatever. So now I answer the question that I'm always trying to answer in this podcast, which is, how did this shape my journey towards being able to say that home is wherever I am right now? Well, I think that creative self expression, measured with the ruler of authenticity and what feels good to me, rather than the ruler of its quote success out in the world, um, it helps me know myself and feel more comfortable in my own skin. I made a list of the things that of the benefits that I think that imperfect creative self-expression, or maybe like unself-conscious creative self-expression, has. It reinforces identity, first of all. When you create, you're making choices. What to say, what colors to use, what story to tell. Those choices reflect your inner world. Even if the final product feels messy or unpolished, I think the act of creating affirms I have a perspective. I exist. My inner experience is real. And over time, I think this strengthens the self concept because you begin to see yourself as someone with a voice rather than someone who is always waiting for permission to speak. And second thing, I think it builds self trust. Perfectionism often teaches us not to act unless we're sure we'll succeed. And by the way, I think, at least in my experience, this often comes from people are very judgy of mistakes. And I don't know if this is like a capitalist thing or if it's just that like I'm autistic, so I made a lot of social mistakes or whatever, or because I was like I was so good academically but so bad socially. So I, had few friends but was always at the top of the class. So if I ever made a mistake and like wasn't the top of the class or whatever, I would get just ridiculed so intensely. So I don't know if it was just my experiences specifically, but I think a lot of people have these experiences of like society is very unforgiving of mistakes. So I feel like a lot of us develop perfectionism as this like defense mechanism survival tactic of, if I do anything less than perfectly, I will be stigmatized, I will be shamed, I will be ridiculed, blah 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 blah. I mean, honestly, I feel like that's part of the reason that I don't use my full name or identifying details on this podcast. I mean, partially anonymity just feels safer in this current kind of fascist turn that our country is taking. Um, but also partially, I don't know, it just feels more self-conscious if people knew like my real full name. So I will say, that I still feel like I'm under the yoke of perfectionism a little bit. But anyway, I do think that creating bad, quote, bad art pushes against that perfectionism. When you allow yourself to make something imperfect and survive the discomfort, you build resilience. You prove to yourself that your worth isn't dependent on performance. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I fully believe that this podcast is so far from perfection. Um, and it is, in some ways, uncomfortable. But I'm surviving the discomfort. And I feel like the more I do this, the more resilience I am building. Okay, next thing. It processes emotion safely. Creative expression gives form to feelings that might otherwise stay all tangled up inside. Trauma, grief, anger, anger's a big one for me, confusion, these can be overwhelming when unnamed. Art externalizes them. Even clumsy expression reduces emotional load because it moves experience from being trapped inside me to something I can observe. And that shift alone can lower anxiety and reduce clarity. So, for me, this kind of relates to alexithymia, which, for people who aren't familiar, it's like not knowing what you're feeling, being kind of disconnected from your emotions, having a hard time knowing what you're feeling, having a hard time putting specific names to your emotions, knowing what to do about it. And it is more common in autistic and ADHD and traumatized people. And I'll always remember this one thing that a therapist once said to me, where she said, you are often frustrated not because you're actually like, not because the situation you're describing is making you frustrated, but you often seem frustrated because you don't understand your own emotions surrounding the situation. And I was like, whoa, that is so true. Lately, I've kind of gotten into the habit of, with anger specifically, because anger is the emotion for me that just sends me into dysregulation spirals. Um, so I've kind of gotten in the habit of like, if I feel overwhelmingly angry, I will like try to write it out. Um, Sometimes I'll even talk to ChatGPT about it, although I don't recommend using ChatGPT as a therapist, but I do think that ChatGPT can help you like organize your own thoughts and organize your own emotions and that sort of thing. If you're doing it properly, if that makes sense. So I recommend, if you don't know how to do it properly, then maybe just stick to journaling without AI being involved. Um, but I have found that even in just the art, I guess you could call it, of writing it out, journaling, um, just being able to give a name to things. Often in the process of writing it out, I figure out like why I'm so angry. Maybe there's actually some grief hidden in there. Um, Maybe it's like specifically it's betrayal, which is like a specific type of hurt, and creates a specific type of anger. And I've just found that naming it really helps to process the emotions. It helps over time, I think, with alexithymia. And of course, if writing isn't your thing, like I also can find a lot of catharsis from music, either listening or creating music, like singing or playing an instrument can be very helpful. Um, and even that is not necessarily putting specific words to your emotions, but it's kind of just externalizing them and like getting them out there in a way that has helped me become more familiar with my emotions. Okay, next thing. I think that creative self expression can interrupt shame. Calling something bad art often reflects internalized standards, comparison, productivity culture, or fear of judgment, right? Like, who says it's bad? I feel like for any piece of art, there are going to be at least one person or a handful of people who like that piece of art. Um, so I don't even think that, like, let's say you took a survey and 95% of people thought that the art was bad and terrible, and 5% thought it was great and intriguing. I don't think we can necessarily call that bad art. Because I feel like if even one person, even just the person who created it, through the act of creating, felt better and felt good about themselves and enjoyed it, then it's like by definition not bad art. So that's why I keep using bad in quotes. Um, I think so continuing anyway, despite these internalized standards, disrupts shame's narrative. It says, I'm allowed to take up space creatively, even if I'm not exceptional. And that stance challenges the belief that value must be earned through excellence. I know that something that frustrates me a lot, that I run into a lot, and I think a lot of other disabled and marginalized people run into, is this whole myth of like, the disabled person must be extraordinary to compensate for their disabilities. Like the stories that we have of autistic and disabled characters in the media, specifically autistic characters, right? The good doctor. Sheldon is autistically coded, right? From Big Bang Theory, whatever. Um, they are, and I'm also thinking of there's this Korean drama that's about this lawyer girl who's autistic. And like in all of these cases, they're the whole thing is that they're brilliant at what they do. Or Rain Man who can count cards, but also I very strongly argue that Rain Man is not autistic. But anyway, um, it's like, oh, they're so great at this, they're just bad at other things. But like it's okay because they're an amazing lawyer or they're a genius or like this awesome doctor that does it way better than does way better doctor things than most doctor people can or whatever. I'm not a medical doctor. um but that is, I don't know what to call it. I don't know if it's not like inspiration porn, but it's like, or maybe it is. It just gives this signal to disabled and marginalized people that like you can be acceptable, sure, but only if you are exceptional. The quote normal people don't have to be exceptional because they're normal. But if you are different, you have to make up for that difference by being exceptional. And it's also partially why I take a little bit of issue. Okay, I feel like I'm getting off track a little bit, but I'll just finish my thought. I do take a little bit of issue with the um, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the one specific way of looking at it, of like, oh, well, like, and I'm talking about this is what I know, the autistic perspective is what I know, so that's what I'm speaking from. Of like, oh well, neurodivergent people, autistic people, ADHD people, like they have hyper focus, they're so good at this, and that, and like diverse workplaces are more successful and more productive, and all of those things are true. And I do think that those things are important. Um, I have a dream of creating a startup where I only hire disabled and marginalized people, like no able-bodied white neurotypical cishet men allowed, and just like prove to the tech field that we can be more successful. But I think it's also important to remember that like even if like a group of marginalized people does not drastically improve workplace performance, they still deserve to be included, right? Like, what cishet, able bodied, neurotypical white man has to perform above mediocre to keep his job? I feel like none. How many of them perform below mediocre and just fail upwards? So many. So, anyway, I will avoid going off on that um, whole rant. But I think we need more media or examples of just an autistic person just being average, just an average autistic person performing averagely in an average workplace, right? So the point is that doing this creative self expression, I think, pushes back against that narrative. that narrative that value must be earned through excellence. It says, nope, I'm just average, or maybe even below average in this specific art medium, and that's okay. Okay, next thing. Creative self expression, I think, creates meaning without external validation. Mental health often suffers when self worth hinges on likes, praise, or measurable success, right? We all know how harmful it can be to um, be overly invested in social media likes and shares or whatever. I don't know. I don't use social media much. I don't know if shares are a thing. I assume they're a thing. I do just remember having a Facebook when I was younger, and oh my god, just like analyzing like, oh, the number of likes I'm getting, the number of friends I have was just so bad, so harmful. Anyway, um making art purely because it feels meaningful reorients your motivation inward. Intrinsic motivation, which is doing something because it aligns with your values, has strong links to long term psychological well being. So it's basically saying that um, I am creating something meaningful, and it is meaningful because I say it's meaningful, because it aligns with my values, because it feels authentic and good to me. Um, Not because it got X number of likes on Instagram or Reddit or Spotify or whatever, which is very hard for me, I think, because, there's that saying, the best revenge is a life well lived. And I do fully agree with that. But the problem that I've had is I've always thought of the life well lived as being defined by other people. Like I thought, okay, well, if I just become successful and make a lot of money and get a good partner and build this awesome life, then, if I ever ran into my parents again, who I'm no contact with currently, I could just like look down my nose at them and be like, I'm all rich and successful, just like dad is. So, proved it to you. Um, but that that doesn't feel achievable to me right now. So it's like I have to have a different definition of what a life well lived might be. Um, Hopefully this makes sense. I've often thought about like sometimes I get so angry at like the mostly men that I went to school with, and I've been fired. I've been asked to resign. I'm sure that they probably all think my career, if they care enough to like look me up or whatever, they probably think that my career is like an embarrassment, and oh, I'm probably just like the, I don't know, emotional woman who like couldn't keep a job. And of course, we all know it's because I'm autistic and also because I'm a woman. But I do think that the intersection of sexism and ableism is quite a doozy. But anyway, I thought that, oh, I will, like, I'll show them, I'll go freelance and like become super successful that way, or I'll start a podcast and get so many followers, and then I'll be able to say, ha, I won. I don't know if that makes any sense, but shifting from that to I am now going to define a life well lived by doing things that feel good inwardly, that feel aligned with me, that match my values. Like, that is now my definition of a life well lived, not the outward success of money or friends or partners or whatever. Okay, last item on the list, it fosters agency. Creation is an act of agency. in a world where many factors are outside of our control, choosing to make something restores a sense of authorship over at least one small corner of our life. Agency is deeply tied to resilience and emotional stability. And I know that people who feel out of control will often resort to things like self harm or disordered eating, which I think is also technically a form of self harm. And I know that I have engaged in both of those things, and probably the vast majority of traumatized and autistic women that I know have also done that. And it's just nice to give another option of control. Like, if everything feels so out of control, acts of self creation can provide that sense of agency, which is what you're desperately trying to find, I think, or what I was desperately trying to find when I was engaging in like self harm or disordered eating. It's all about desperately trying to find control. And so, anyway, just pointing out that there's like a healthier way, a way more aligned with making home in your own nervous system to gain this sense of agency and control. So that's my summary of how my debatably failed attempts to become a content creator have helped me to make home in my own nervous system, and how, in a way, I mean, monetarily it matters. It would be very nice if this succeeded so that I could make money off of it and not have to get another real job after being laid off from my real job. But non monetarily, it doesn't matter if it succeeds or not. It still has helped me feel more at home in my own body and in my own nervous system. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. If anything in this episode resonated with you and you'd like to share a thought, reflection, or bit of feedback, you're very welcome to email me. And if this podcast feels supportive or meaningful to you, I'd appreciate it if you left an honest review or shared it with someone who might also find it helpful. That's how this work finds the people that it's meant for. You've been listening to Home is Where the Body Is. I'm Jen, and I wish you a safe journey home.